Hi, I'm Charlie, and welcome to part 7 of 7 on my series of Nestor Makhno, entitled After the End, the years 1921 to 1934. We're going to talk about the pervasive powers of myth-making and disappointment that plague history. Yes, we are! Oh, yes, we are! Woo! Nestor Makhno's afterlife begins in 1921. He lived till 1934, but his afterlife is reasonably calibrated as the moment he sets foot in Romanian soil. As you may recall, Nestor Makhno escaped from war-torn Ukraine after fighting the Bolsheviks, sorely wounded, and he begins a long and difficult journey with his wife, Agafia Kuzmenko. It is not a glorious eat, pray, love type of journey. It is a harrowing journey from Romania to Germany to France, frequently either in refugee camps or in jail cells. It's almost as if nation states don't necessarily welcome someone whose entire ideology and appeal is how unnecessary the nation state is to human happiness and productivity. Makhno and Kuzmenko settle in Paris, and from 1926 to 1934, Nestor Makhno would take a series of jobs to keep his family afloat. Carpenter, and at the end of his life, a line worker at the Renault plant. The Renault is this very sort of boxy, stereotypically French car. Nestor Makhno really never lost that working man persona and appeal, the sort of gruff but practical thing. Talking about Nestor Makhno's life after the Russian Civil War is a bit like observing a transplanted plant, for lack of a better word. Sure, technically it can grow outside of its native soil, but you probably don't expect it to thrive. And Nestor Makhno was specced for the Ukrainian peasant lifestyle. It's what he'd grown up as, it's what he understood, it's what he was very good at conveying to others. And so while he might live in Paris with Agafia and his new daughter, a part of him was doubtless devastated that he couldn't ever, in a million years, return to the Ukraine, which would suffer tremendously under Bolshevik rule. This is not to say that Nestor Ivanovich Makhno was not productive in his forced exile in France. He wrote his memoirs. He wrote a series of blistering philippics against the Bolshevik state, who, as he spoke and as he wrote, was busy trying to alternately remove any memory of his deeds from the Soviet collective consciousness, or accusing him and his army of crimes that they, in fact, had perpetrated. Most pointedly, the Soviet historians and writers of the time leaned really heavily into the pogromist aspect of the Russian Civil War and accused every other faction of committing pogroms, but of course not the glorious Red Army. Never in a million years. Makhno would write in his works that the Bolsheviks put a nice layer of paint on state power, but steadfastly refused to change it. To extrapolate a bit more, the Bolsheviks made Tsarism without the Tsar. And the Bolsheviks would be busy putting down left-leaning ideologies, rising against them in the Tambov Rebellion and the Kronstadt Rebellion for a while. Nestor Makhno was not alone in Paris. Paris at this time was full of anarchists. The French anarchist scene was a pretty big one. He met with Emma Goldman and Alex Berkman, two American anarchists who were responsible, at least in part, for visiting Russia during the Russian Civil War and after, back when Russia still had a very, very good PR department of come to the Soviet Union, we're a workers' paradise and nothing bad ever happens here, as long as you stick with your Cheka handler and don't move outside the prescribed zones and see the oppression and brutality. Makhno got along with them fairly well. He also got to meet a person who he quite took after, the sort of Amalie of anarchism, May Piqueret, who not only got to sing an anarchist fight song in the middle of the Kremlin when Trotsky called on her in the middle of a dinner to sing the Internationale, but also refused to shake his hand in negotiations for the release of anarchist prisoners as a nice little you. May Piqueret is fascinating, and her life story and work extends far beyond this. But Makhno was appreciated, even if he didn't get along with everyone, by his fellow anarchists as he wrote. And there's a great story that says everything you need to know about the decline of Makhno's life. He's talking with one of his friends, and they ask, "Why do you have that scar there?" And according to this source, Makhno says in a very stoic sort of way, "My wife tried to cut my throat while I was sleeping in Germany. She did not succeed." The marriage between Agafia and Makhno did not go great after it was removed from the context of the Russian Civil War. Makhno died in 1934 of sickness. Remarkably, for a internationally wanted anarchist, his funeral attracted about 500 mourners when he was cremated, which is, I certainly don't know 500 people. That's remarkable. The remains of the Black Army scattered widely. Some of them, like Leah Feldman, who is known as the Makhnovist Granny and in fact died only in 1993, would form some parts of the anarchists in the Spanish Civil War, fighting against Franco's fascists. So the winds that blew them out were fairly wide. But we're going to talk about what we started talking about in the first episode, which is we're here to tell history and not a hagiography. A hagiography, for those of you who are not up on your Catholic vocab, is the biography of a saint, and it universally makes them out to be wonderful and pure at every possible step. Great man history, and in particular biographies, tend to tilt towards hagiographies because we want to like the people we spend time and money and effort to understand. It is not in my interest to give you a hagiography of Nestor Ivanovich Makhno. He was quick-tempered, innovative, violent, crude in his own way. He's an easy figure to romanticize, right? A figure who conducts daring raids on the White Army while dressing his battalion like they're attending a wedding to blend in, and then, aha! We fooled you! These are not, in fact, wedding carts. They have machine guns. Very Robin Hood, right? Easy to mythologize that man. And while he was certainly better than Lenin or Trotsky or Grigoriev, morally speaking, he had a code of morals, and it killed him when his troops wouldn't follow the prescribed revolutionary forms of justice. Don't shoot civilians. Don't take more than you need. Don't use the fact that you're a part of the Black Army to settle your personal vendettas. he at least had a recognizable moral core, which makes it very, very tempting to make him a saint. And of course, he wasn't a saint, he was a person who made mistakes and ultimately died from them. But it's really interesting to observe his afterlife in the anarchist community, because what writings we have from Nestor Ivanovich Makhno are political documents. He was a political animal. They are meant to show the horrors of Bolshevism at the time and fascism, and promote anarchy as a legitimate way of running not only your life, but of a pseudo-state. And so we have to read them critically. But I think that an interesting exercise to end this series on is a quote from another interesting figure about Makhno. This is a quote from Edward Abbey, who's a famous American, I would say, naturalist, but also he tends to tilt towards the anarcho-communist side of the political spectrum. And in this quote, Edward Abbey is talking about the distinction between civilization and culture. I think it deserves to be read in its entirety. It's a bit of a long quote. Edward Abbey says in his book, Desert Solitaire, "To make the distinction unmistakably clear, civilization is the vital force in human history. Culture is the inert mass of institutions and organizations which accumulate around and tend to drag down the advance of life. Civilization is Giordano Bruno facing death by fire. Culture is Cardinal Bellamarino, after 10 years of Inquisition, sending Bruno to the stake in the Campo di Fiori. Civilization is Sartre, culture is Cocteau. Civilization is mutual aid and self-defense. Culture is the judge, the law book, and the forces of law and order. Civilization is uprising, insurrection, revolution. Culture is the war of the state against another state, or of machines against people, as in Hungary and Vietnam. Civilization is tolerance, detachment, and humor, or passion, anger, revenge. Culture is the entrance examination, the gas chamber, and the doctoral dissertation, followed by the electric chair. Civilization is the Ukrainian peasant Nestor Makhno fighting the Germans, then the Reds, then the Whites, then the Reds again. Culture is Stalin and the fatherland. Civilization is Jesus turning water into wine. Culture is Christ walking on the waves. Civilization is a youth with a Molotov cocktail in his hand. Culture is the Soviet tank or the LA cop that guns him down. Civilization is the wild river. Culture is tons of cement. Civilization flows, culture thickens and coagulates like tired, sick, stifled blood. I want to be very clear that I am not comparing Nestor Ivanovich Makhno to Jesus. I have no doubt he would resent the comparison intimately. But I think that quote illustrates the fundamental distinction between Nestor Makhno as a metronym, a code word for a series of actions or principles, and Nestor Makhno, the human being. The perpetually nervous but energized person who has an attack of PTSD upon seeing someone who has abused him, or someone who makes the joke that I've built a republic out of tachanki, those little horse-drawn carts with machine guns. I think that it's important that we end this note that I have done my best to give you a history rather than a hagiography.